Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Welcome to Writers and Books. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs here. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary center. For those of you tuning in from online, we're in Rochester, New York. We offer literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds, currently now online and in person. This is our first in-person event in our building, so we're very excited about that. Our theme for 2021 is taking care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. So we're so happy to have David Seaburn with us tonight. David Seaburn is the author of 8 novels, including Charlie No Face, a finalist for the National Indie Excellence Award in General Fiction, Parrot Talk, which was shortlisted for the Somerset Award in 2018, and Gavin, Goode, an American Book Fest finalist for Best Book in General Fiction in 2019. David is a retired marriage and family therapist, psychologist, and Presbyterian minister who lives in Spencerport, New York, with his wife, Bonnie. After serving a rural parish for 6 years, he entered the mental health field. He was an assistant professor of psychiatry and family medicine at the University of Rochester Medical Center for nearly 20 years. He has published over 60 academic papers and co-authored 2 books. He has served as a teaching artist at Writers and Books for a number of years. David Seaburn's latest novel, Broken Pieces of God, is a story of resilience in the face of uncertainty, hope in the midst of darkness, and family ties strengthened by life's vicissitudes. Kirkus Review has called it a sensitive and moving tale of family tragedy and renewal. And we're selling it for 15% off tonight, so please get your copy. Thank you so much, and please welcome David Seaburn.
Get a copy and a cookie. Just a little background on this book. Of the books I've written, 2 have evolved from random news articles I've read online. And this is one of them. Story, I won't tell the whole story of where it comes from, but a gentleman in, I think it was in New Jersey. I read this 8 years ago, and so it stayed with me all that time. Had a run-in with a statue of Jesus that was both hopeful and catastrophic all at the same time. And I couldn't, and I couldn't shake the story. So it eventually became kind of a centerpiece for this particular novel. What I want, just a little tidbit of information. Whenever I was about 27 and was serving a little rural church about 20 miles west of here, I wrote a book of inspirational stuff. And I sent it off to Macmillan Publishing, and the editor there in the religion area really liked it, and they offered me, they said they wanted to publish it. And of course, I went and told everybody that I knew. And then 6 weeks later, he contacted me to say, sorry, sorry, we're not going to do this. But he did say, I'll catch you on your 10th book. Well, I had 2 professional books, and this is my 8th novel. So I set a goal for myself to get the 10 books. I don't know if this gentleman is alive or not, but I finally got there. Started when I was 27, and I'm 71 now, so it took a little time before I got there. I should say hi to all the Zoom people, and there are some friends, and might be even a relative on the other end. So this story is really, I'm doing what I usually do, which I'm really interested in families, which is what I built my career around. And usually these stories are about ordinary families who are facing extraordinary circumstances and how they deal with them. And this is similar to the others in that regard. Broken Pieces of God is a story about the Kimes family. Eddy Kimes, in his mid to late 50s, is a supervisor at a cable company and has been laid off the result of a business being sold over and over again. Gayle is his wife. She has a solo tax preparation business in her home. She has recently been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Their son, Rich, who's in his late 20s, they have a son and daughter who live out of state, is trying to make it on his own in marketing. And Sandy, their daughter, who's 2 years younger, is struggling to make it in the tech field after being laid off from Facebook. She had been working in privacy areas, and whenever they lost interest in privacy, she lost her job. Rich and Sandy don't realize that they share a secret about a sexual assault that happened when they were both in high school and its tragic aftermath. So this is a family that is dealing with secrecy, with unemployment, failed chemotherapy, no insurance. And so they're really struggling with just about all the kinds of things that people can struggle with these days. This is pre-pandemic, although there's a broad shadow cast late in the book about what might be coming. So to deal with all this, Eddy turns to a statue of Jesus for help, while Gayle seeks a solution by trying to manipulate and possibly defraud the IRS. In the meantime, Rich and Sandy face the painful reveal about this long-held secret. And as Dan said, it's a story of resilience, hope, and the strength of family ties. I'm going to sit because this is too low for me. Boy, never done it this way before. So I'm going to read 4 excerpts that will take 4.5 hours. So buckle up, and I hope you brought something to eat other than a cookie. Now my reading will probably take a little less than 20 minutes, and I'll take 4 excerpts from this story. The first is the statue of Jesus is a significant character in this novel. And in the first chapter, Eddy visits a meditation garden behind a church where the statue stands. And it goes like this. Eddy headed around back to the meditation garden. It was sequestered behind dense holly bushes surrounding a 12-foot tall statue of Jesus. The bronze plaque said, "Jesus the Consoler." In the 50s, when the church was going great guns, a rich congregant died and left money for the church, stipulating that it had to be used for an external adornment of a religious nature. Church folks say that the marble was quarried in Greece and sculpted in Italy. It arrived on a massive flatbed. Schools closed early so children could watch the 50-foot crane hoist the gleaming white Jesus into place. Some whispered that area Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, and Catholics smiled through thinly veiled covetousness when Reverend Cecil Upchurch discovered an imperfection in the statue, a chip the size of a man's thumb near Jesus' collarbone. Stunned and embarrassed, church elders wanted to sue, but Reverend Upchurch saved the day, kind of. He said the notch, as it became known, was a sign of Jesus' identification with human imperfection and a reminder that Christ alone was perfect. Most members accepted this, though several members left for St. Paul's Episcopal Church, where money matters were handled more deftly. This opened the door for every armchair theologian in town to take shots at the Consoler. The biggest complaint was that Jesus' nose was too large, that it wasn't Anglo-Saxon enough, that it looked, well, Jewy. Upchurch explained that Jesus was Middle Eastern and a Jew. Many congregants were aghast. Behind closed doors, some members suggested that it might be time for Reverend Upchurch to consider a new calling. Some even referred to him as Reverend Upchuck. Others left to join the Chapel of the End Times out on Town Line Road. Finding no one in the garden, Eddy sat on the cool marble bench. He looked up at Jesus' face, which was tilted down as if looking back at him. "Howdy," he said. Jesus looked a little 60s-ish, his hair long, his beard thick. There was a faint smile on his lips. His arms were outstretched, billowy sleeves hanging loose, palms up, fingers open and curled slightly. His feet were bare. The years and the winters had replaced his gleam with elephant gray grit. Eddy came to the garden for the first time when he started getting bad news. He was out for a walk and passed the church. The bushes rustled in the wind and he looked up, noticing Jesus' face peering over the top of the holly. At first, it seemed funny to Eddy. Notre Dame may have their touchdown Jesus, but we have our Jesus the voyeur. He kept walking, but on the way back, he went through the opening in the bushes and sat down on the bench. There was nothing out of the ordinary about his visit, except that he enjoyed the aloneness of it. He went back from time to time after that. When he first told Gayle, she stopped folding the laundry. Her expression said, "I don't know who you are at all." Not that she was anti-religion, it was more that they had never been church people. Neither of their families had been regular either. They went on holidays, but even then, it didn't matter which church they went to, just so it wasn't too far away. Eddy felt uncomfortable under Gayle's gaze. He tried to explain, I don't know what it is. It's just, Gayle seemed to accept his reasoning. Do you pray or something? I don't know. Okay, she said. He kept going, touching the statue's feet where the robe made him feel different. He couldn't say why, except that he felt far away and nearby all at the same time. Other times it felt worrisome to sit there staring at a giant slab of marble made to look like a famous man from old. So that's our first excerpt. Trust me, there's no need to do that. I just need to get a sip of water. In the second scene, Eddy and Gayle are going to Gayle's first chemo treatment. Wait a minute, said Eddy. I got something. He went to the back closet by the kitchen to get a plastic bag. Okay, close your eyes, Eddy. No, really, just do it. Gayle frowned, but closed her eyes. Okay, open. Gayle grinned, then smiled and laughed, her hands going up and then slapping her thighs. Eddy was holding up a pink t-shirt that said, "Hey, cancer, eat chemo and die." That should do it, don't you think? He pulled a second shirt from the bag. I got one for both of us. Gayle put her arms around Eddy and laid her head on his chest. It was a large rectangular room with scuffed linoleum floors and beige naugahyde lounge chairs lining the walls and filling the corners. The chairs had monitors and IV poles. There were about 7 people hooked up when they arrived. A nurse greeted Gayle. She was as welcoming as a hostess or maitre d'. She pointed to the room as if asking which table they would prefer, something near the window perhaps. Eddy smiled sheepishly and Gayle didn't say much. The nurse nodded towards a station that was set apart from the others. She couldn't recall what medicines they were giving her. The word that stuck in her mind was cocktail. It would be a cocktail of meds designed to aggressively attack the cancer. She felt like a warrior going into battle against an enemy she couldn't see. They explained that the chemo would go to every nook and cranny of her body, searching out the enemy, she supposed. But it was far less precise than that. Since the chemo went everywhere, it could wreak havoc everywhere as well. This seemed odd to Gayle and Eddy, who looked at each other quizzically. To Gayle, it seemed like a plan that was inefficient. We'll line up every organ in your body, then a firing squad will shoot them all, hoping that they only kill the guilty one. Okay, the third excerpt is Eddy going to the unemployment office. He's been out of work now for many months without any promise of getting anything. The case manager speaks first. You remember what it says, don't you, Mr. She looked at her computer screen, Kimes. I mean, we gave you the paperwork a long time ago, didn't we? Yeah, somebody did, but do you remember what it says? Not word for word, let me remind you. It says that every recipient of unemployment benefits must make at least three work search activities per week to keep their benefits. She turned her face to him, but didn't make eye contact. But like I said, Mr. Kimes, I'm sorry, but those are the rules. Eddy sat up in his chair, back straight. I'll bet I'll hook you up. I bet I hooked you up, he said. Excuse me? Table, telephone, cable, the whole deal. I bet that actually my team hooked you up. And I bet that when a snowstorm knocked you out, you called and it was me that responded. Mr. Kimes, I've worked all my life and I've never needed anyone to remind me to work hard or to keep trying. I wanted to work. I wanted to pay my way. I wanted to make a life for my family. I have a home, 2 grown, successful children, and a wife with cancer and no job and no health insurance. Mr. Kimes, I'm sorry, but I know you see dozens of people like me every day, and after a while, they all kind of run together like so many random parts on an assembly line. Eddy wanted to say, I want you to know that this is what makes a person go insane. This is exactly what makes someone get a gun and wave it around just to get somebody to pay attention. It's crazy, isn't it? But over here on this side of your desk where I'm sitting, it makes sense. It's the only way out when there's no way forward. But he didn't say it. Here's what I want. I want you to remember me tonight when you go home. When you sit down for dinner, remember Eddy Kimes, who had a job, a good job with good pay, a job that he lost, a job that was taken away from him for no good reason. Remember that. That's the third one. And our final one finds Eddy back at the statue. Oftentimes he goes there with the minister at the church, whose name is Peter Goff. And the minister is always trying to encourage him to pray, which he doesn't really want to do. But now he's getting desperate, and he's come to the statue alone. And he remembers what Reverend Goff has said to him. Just speak from your heart, Reverend Goff had told him. God will incline his ear. Do what with his ear? Said Eddy. God will listen. And then what? Peter shrugged his shoulders. It's hard to tell. Hard to tell, he said to himself now as he looked vacantly at the statue. He bowed his head and folded his hands. He opened one eye to make sure no one was looking. He opened his mouth and closed it. He relaxed his hands and unbowed his head. He stretched out his legs and leaned forward to ease the tension in his back. How to start? Reverend Goff prayed silently, so that wasn't any help at all. Channel surfing on Sunday mornings, though, Eddy had seen snippets of many televangelists, their arms outstretched, their faces looking painfully constipated. He raised his arms and lowered his head. Dearest Jesus, and thou, Father, God of all, and writer of the Bible, I have never donest this which thou must surely knowest. He shifted his weight on the slab. Actually, I liest. As a child, my mother always madest me say my prayers before I wentest to bed at night. Now I lay me, you know the rest. But as an adult, I have not prayed. I knowest that thou dost not knowest me well at all. Jesus, he thought. I'm Eddy. Reverend Goff Peter said I should pray because I have so much in common with Job. His lips flapped as he exhaled hard. I am, or amst, sitting before thee here on this marble bench in a beseeching frame of mind. He lowered his arms and raised his head. Eddy knew he couldn't do it like the big time prayers on TV. Look, I can't pray, so I'm just going to talk. I'm going to speak my mind if that's okay. Eddy could feel the statue engulfing him, swallowing him. He steadies his hands by pressing them against his thighs. Let's see. I made some notes. Eddy opened his wallet, unfolded a sheet of paper. Okay, so number 1, but he choked. He put the list and the wallet back in his pocket and shifted his weight yet again, trying to avoid his sciatic nerve. His eyes narrowed, his chin jutted, and a glowering shadow crossed his bulky face. Okay, so here's my question. What the hell, excuse my language, but what the hell kind of God are you anyway? He was quiet except for the wind rustling the bushes. Jesus the Consoler's expression remained unchanged. Nothing bad happened, so he went on. Gayle and me may not be churchgoers, but we are good people, especially Gayle. We raise 2 great kids. We are hard workers. We pay our taxes. We're good friends to everyone we know. We vote. We give to some charities when we can. We don't hurt anyone. We don't complain. We ask for almost nothing in return, just a house and enough money to pay the bills. We like to go on vacation every year too. And we do have a flat screen TV, big but not ridiculous, and 2 cars, nothing extravagant, although we do have an SUV, which isn't so good on your creation, but it's just an Equinox. Anyways, I'm off topic. The point is, we're living our lives as best we can. So why mess with it? Why cancer? Let me amend that. Cancer is cancer, I get that. But why a cancer that you can't do anything about? And my job, okay, Gayle has been warning me for years, but really, why now? Why the exquisitely poor timing? Actually, cruel timing. Even if we had to face these things one at a time, it would be better than this. But all at once, you don't know anything about health insurance, do you? You don't know anything about what it's like down here, do you? A lot has changed in the last 2,000 years. Eddy's cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at Jesus, then looked at the phone. Hi, honey. Yeah, heading home. Sure, what do we need? Just milk? How about some ice cream or pudding? How's that sound? Yeah, a milkshake. Sure, I'll make you one when I get home. Okay, no problem. Love you too. Eddy slipped his phone back into his pocket and stood in front of the statue. I guess for now, I'll have to put an amen on this. He stopped briefly at the opening to the garden, pulled his jacket collar up again, and turned back to Jesus the Consoler, whose eyes appeared to be averted. That's the end. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have about anything. I have opinions on everything. Yes.
In this book, I've read the book. You reference different places in Rochester that are familiar to us, and I always have a chuckle or a smile when I hit something in one of the books. In another book, you did the same. Do you think that that's? I mean, it's great for us, but what about people who don't live around here?
Yeah,
it doesn't have the same effect.
Right.
Kind of thing.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But you have to establish place. It's really important to establish some kind of location for where you're at. And it's pretty common for us to read novels where people are talking about places where the story takes place that we've never been. But usually mine are either in this area or near my hometown of Western Pennsylvania. And, simply stated, it's, I use the places that I feel like I know best. And actually, the one that I'm working on now will be in my hometown or thereabouts, because I feel like I actually know that area even more than I know this area, even though we've lived here since 1975. So, but it's important to establish a sense of place. And some of those things are meaningful to people in Rochester, but someone who isn't here, it still establishes locations and idea that they're living in a real place and that sort of thing.
I love it.
Good. I didn't mention Kodak in this one, which usually I have some sad thing to say if I could. Other questions, Alan?
It's really nice to hear you read what you've written, and one of the things I like best about your books is the way you do dialogue. It sounds so natural and real, and it's just regular. Do you read out loud some of the things that you've written to kind of try it out and listen to it, or is it just all silent writing?
No, I read it. And it does, for me as a writer, it makes a big difference to read it. Sometimes I'll go back and read something that whenever I was writing it, I really liked. And then I realized I was writing it to be read rather than heard. And I really think in fiction writing, you're writing so it can be heard off the page. So I often have to then change the language so it'll sound like somebody is saying it. And eventually I read the whole, I mean, I read the whole thing out loud or in a little murmur so that I can get a sense not only of how the dialogue works, but also just the flow. Do you go along and find words that don't seem like they should be there, which seems like a small thing, but I like to make sure that it goes along and it reads with a certain flow and with a certain rhythm. And I think I look at the dialogue kind of the same way. And it always starts up in here, and you think about what people might say, and then further in, I see places in my mind, and I kind of see characters, but I actually have never seen the faces of any of my characters. They don't come to me that way. And I finally figured out that I think whenever I'm writing from each perspective, I'm kind of looking at the world through their eyes. So I don't really see their faces. But I do later in the book really want to make sure that I'm true to who I think those characters are and what they may or may not do and things like that. So that takes work to kind of get that right rhythm and get the language right.
So this is my first experience of your novel, and curious to know if it's written from multiple points of view.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wondered what your choices were there, and it seems as though the two main protagonists would be of equal weight. So I was curious to know. And how is it for you written from a woman's point of view?
Well, in my first few novels, women had fairly small parts because I didn't really feel comfortable with it. But as I went along, sometimes hi Bill, sometimes a secondary female character would just emerge as a really strong voice. And I think that, sometimes I didn't even feel like it was on purpose. It just, they became somebody who really had things to say that really were worth putting into the novel. Then I felt a little bit more comfortable with that. But it's extra hard. I really try hard. I look at the scenes to see, how sexist is this, or isn't it, or what, and I try very hard to be, I try to do a good job with that as much as I can. Yeah. And in this one, Gayle is I think a really strong character, and her daughter is a strong character. And there's other really important characters as a pharmacist friend and the woman that he gets involved with, who ends up to be a really interesting character. And then his son, it's too hard to explain the circumstances, but there's really a distant character who comes in, a woman who's really a very strong voice in terms of her advocacy for certain things. But it's a lot of work for me. Yeah. I haven't ventured to other sorts of folk because I have felt like I'm not the person to do that. Yeah. Jude. You what? Oh, and come here, buddy.
Thank you so much.
You don't need Kirkus reviews anymore.
No. That's great. Thank you, Jude. I really appreciate it. You've got more questions.
Can I have the second question?
Yes.
Can you tell us about some of the novels you particularly admire, and in what ways it influenced your own journey?
The people that I really like now, the person I think is the best right now, an American writer, is Jesmyn Ward. And I just like the way she writes characters, and her novels are kind of quiet but powerful in a sense, and she gets into experiences that are extraordinarily real, and I really like that. Colson Whitehead is another one that I really like, and I'm impressed by just, you know, he goes from one thing to another and writes just beautifully, whether he's writing about zombies or the Underground Railroad or whatever he's writing about. So I try to keep up with them. Alice McDermott is another one that I really, really liked. Her book, Someone, I love that novel. And to be quite honest, nothing happened in it. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful novel about this woman across her life. And there was no building to a climax or anything like that. It kind of, yes, yeah, exactly. And gives you a different sense of how to shape a novel and things like that. So I mean, Philip Roth, I always really like. Jonathan Franzen, I really like, although I could never, ever even attempt the kind of things that he does, these mammoth stories, social commentary that really gets down to the very, very personal level. I don't know how he does it, but you know, he's pretty amazing. So those are some of the ones that I.
Did you decide to pivot from more academic writing? Well, it sounds like you started with creative writing early since you had your meditating for age 27. Wondering if you can talk about what that impulse was about and how you recognized that you needed to review for your own fulfillment, you need to go in that direction.
Well, it took a long time. I didn't start writing fiction until I was 50. And one of the big reasons was that I just didn't think I could do it. Whenever I was in the ministry, I wrote some plays, I wrote some short stories and stuff. But even I knew they were, particularly the short stories, I didn't really think were very good. And I just didn't think I had the imagination to write fiction. I learned a lot doing academic writing. You learn a lot about discipline, editing, committing to a project that's going to take a long time, being clear with your language, a lot of things that made a big difference. But there was an experience that occurred with a patient of mine that I wrote a kind of creative nonfiction piece about, just a single incident in his life. And I thought, wow, I wonder if I could rework this into something longer. And I made a bunch of notes in 1990 and put them in a folder, and they just stayed there. And then around 2000, I read, I'm trying to think, it was the Book of Ruth, or I forget which novel it was. It was a first person. I read it, I thought, I could do that. I could do it in that voice, or not that voice, but I could do it in the first person. So I came up with how I wanted to go at the characters. Of course, over those years, the whole idea changed quite a bit. That was my first attempt at writing fiction. And that was in 2000, 2001. And it got published by an almost nothing kind of publisher in 2005. And then I left academics in 2005 and worked in our school district for 5 years before I retired. So there's lots of different reasons I left the academic setting, but one of them was I realized that I probably was at a point where I would have, in terms of committing time to writing, it'd be really hard to do both. And the first one was hard because I was still directing a family therapy program. I was finishing a PhD and then trying to write this novel. And it was, I thought, I can't do that in 10 more years. So the thing that was most helpful for me was I realized I don't need to know where this is going. I just need to start. And the writing will kind of help me discover where I'm going. I'm not an outliner. A lot of people do that. I don't. I need to have a title. I need at least one character that I feel like I know well, and then I can figure out who's going to be other characters. And I need a circumstance. And then it goes from there. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
One from online from Jan. Has anything about the pandemic affected or surprised you about your writing?
I've been listening to a lot of interviews with authors, and that's a common question, asking about the pandemic influence. And this one I was writing during the pandemic, but I'll have to say it really didn't influence. I mean, the story was on its way. And in a way, being able to spend time writing it was really helpful. It was helpful to have something else to focus on, a story to focus on. Although anybody who's read this so far knows that in the last couple of pages, there's kind of a moment. What I will say is the book that I'm working on right now, whenever I was thinking about what I wanted to write, I thought everybody's going to be writing something related to pandemic. And I really didn't want to do that. So I thought, but I'd like to, this kind of oppressive feeling, I would like to write something about that. So my first recollection was whenever I was 11, almost 12, and we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this one is set at that particular time. Other questions? Yeah.
Just one more. You mentioned with one of these questions how you outline and you kind of pick characters that you can get familiar with. And in the beginning, you mentioned that this story went way back, that you had read something in a newspaper. Did you back into this knowing you knew the end, what was going to happen? Did you back into it?
No, because the thing that I eventually used in the story was not the end. It was a critical, it turned into a critical, very, very significant turning point in the story, but it wasn't the end of the story. Whenever I first kind of latched onto, one of the struggles was, how do I turn this particular story into fiction and do a good job? And then I felt like that is just kind of holding me back. So I created a bigger story, and that became a piece of that story. And then I felt like I had more freedom to do whatever I felt like I wanted to do with that particular piece. That was the case with the other one that I did too. It took me a while to free myself from feeling like I was a reporter and allow that incident to become something that was not exactly like what happened, but was in my imagination now. Anything else? Yes.
Is your current book always your favorite, or do you have one or two favorites among the ones you've read?
The last three, including this one, I feel probably proudest of. I think each one of them I did a pretty good job. But my favorite is my third one, which is called Charlie No Face. And the reason I like that one, and actually it's the most popular one of the ones that I've written, is that it's set in 1959 in my own old hometown, starring an 11-year-old kid. I was 9 at that time, but probably 75, 80% of what's in that book actually happened. And not necessarily the main plot, but all the experiences and examples and things like that happen. And I very unwisely, although it turned out to be okay, used lots of people's names who I knew. And some would say, oh, page 127 was my favorite page. My best friend said after he read the book and things like that. But I never do that again. I wanted to honor them, I guess. Anything else? Yeah.
Can I just ask, where is your book town?
Elwood City, Pennsylvania.
I'm from Western Pennsylvania, so I just wondered if it was anywhere there.
Where are you from?
A little town called Northeast outside of Erie, Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah, Northeast is located in the far northwest part of Pennsylvania.
That's how I always describe it.
Yeah.
What is that rationale?
Oh, well, I looked into that. It's because it used to be part of the Ohio Territory. So it was the northeast part of the Ohio Territory. And then Pennsylvania ended up with it. And they just felt like, we're not changing for anything. So Elwood City would be about 2.5 hours south of that.
Okay.
About 35 miles north and west of Pittsburgh.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, what comes easiest for you to write about? What is hardest, and has that changed over 9 books?
None of it comes easy. In fact, I feel like it gets harder and harder as I get older, to be quite honest. Sometimes literal word finding is tiring, and sometimes it's just tiring to write. So none of it is really very easy. I think the thing that's changed from my earliest books is I really feel like I found my voice. And I can't quite explain what exactly that means. But whenever I sit down, I feel like I'm writing from within myself in some kind of way. Whether it's a downside or not, that means that if anybody read all of my books, they would probably know what my neurosis is, you know, what the things I am most concerned about, those themes of loss and relationships and hope. And, you know, there's a lot of illness in these novels and dealing with difficult things. And they're mostly all about people who, you know, are living in houses, and if you looked at the front door, you would think this is just an average place. And if you opened the door and looked in and listened to what they had to say, you'd find out there's really no average. But those are the kinds of people that I like to write about.
So if it's all hard, how do you get yourself to keep doing it?
That's a good question, Bonnie. No, it's because it's harder not to write at this point. If I miss a few days, I think Bonnie can tell. I don't know if anybody else can tell, but I know that I'm just kind of uneasy. And so even though it's hard to sit down, there's some days just to calm myself, even if I only have 15 or 20 minutes, like before dinner, I'll go down and write 3 sentences and then I feel calm. I'm always about this far away from thinking I can't write at all. So, and always that close to feeling like I have to write. So that's part of what makes it hard. Yeah.
Does your teaching practice nourish your own creativity?
Yeah, whenever I mean, this is the same working, teaching in family therapy and stuff. Like Bill is a whole partner in that. It really makes you think about what you're doing as a therapist whenever you're teaching people that. And whenever I'm teaching or novel writing and things like that, it makes me look at what I'm doing a lot more closely. I'll have to say the last work online thing that I did, it began to tangle me up because I found myself thinking about each of the sentences we're writing because I was teaching about writing sentences and words and things like that. And so I had to kind of back away from it because it was kind of holding me down a little bit. Anything else?
Good question from Gina. Have you yourself ever had an experience with God?
Have I ever had an experience with God? I have never had one of those earth-shattering kinds of experiences that I think people mean whenever they have an experience with God. And I'm still an ordained minister since 1975. But what I have, it's interesting this question because I was thinking about this in particular last week. What I do think I have is I feel like there's like a under the surface or inside each one of it is this kind of vibration that's always there that kind of keeps us attached to whatever is sacred. And that every once in a while, I actually become extraordinarily aware of that. And it comes and it goes like, but it does come. And so I would say I've had that, but I've never had, Mother Teresa had her conversion experience, seeing Jesus on a train ride across Canada, and that changed her life. And she went and did all of her work. She never had an experience with Jesus after that, ever. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Books are for sale, 15% off.
Downstairs, right?
We can take it off here as well. So, on TV.